All systems are go.
Roger that, Control. We will go for console launch.
Roger that, VCS. Power supply is plugged in. Cartridge port is open.
VCS is now at full distribution and great sales anticipated ahead. Control, we have a problem. There's a dip in sales. In television and ColecoVision, catching up fast. We can't keep up with them. We're losing them. We're losing them!
The Atari VCS video game console, past its prime. Atarians, we can rebuild it. We have the technology. We have the capability to make the world's first personal arcade machine. The 5200 will be that machine. Better than the VCS. Better graphics, faster processor, stronger arcade game library.
Welcome to the new Atari 5200 podcast. Fresh, never frozen, no additives, preservatives, or fillers, just 100% pure Atari 5200 greatness.
That's right, Bob. That's our pledge to the 5200 community. Now, as we start our first official podcast episode, let's talk about the purpose of the podcast. So the purpose of the podcast is to review all 69 commercially released games, possibly homebrew and 8-bit conversions, such as those done by Glenn, the 5200 man, and others, provided time allows, the Earth still exists, and both of your hosts are still alive. Now, to learn more about Glenn, the 5200 man, take a listen to Antic Podcast Interview 90, named Glenn, the 5200 man.
The other purpose of the podcast is to see how well this system holds up to bringing the arcade experience home, because that was one of the major selling points of the 5200. We're going to do this by going out and doing a direct comparison from cabinet to couch, and it's a segment I would like to call Road Trip. But most of all, remembering our experiences from the golden age to today, and if I survive my current responsibilities and everything else that's being dumped on me at work, I'll be very happy about it. So hang on, it's going to be quite a ride.
Now, before Bob and I get into the nitty-gritty of this episode, let's take a little bit of time to introduce ourselves and why we're so passionate about the 5200.
Well, as you know, I'm Bob, or as everybody else knows me, Captain Bob. I'm from the previous Atari 5200 Super Podcast, and I was a contributor for that podcast. And one of my basic first loves in computing was the Atari 5200. I had a 2600. I saw my friends getting Intellivisions, ColecoVisions, and I wanted something to keep up with it. But I got to tell you, the 5200 was my second console, and I am Atari to the bone. The 2600 is one of my first loves, but I'll tell you, the 5200 was the one I completely latched onto because that was the one that had the arcade games. And, well, let's face it, as if you heard the previous podcasts, I love Star Raiders, and this is probably one of the best versions of Star Raiders that was ever programmed.
I agree totally with you, Bob. Let's put it to you this way. The 2600 was the girl you used to date, but the 5200 was the lady that became your wife.
I couldn't agree more.
And we're both in matrimony bliss.
Matrimonial bliss.
That's
Yay!
right, matrimonial bliss. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about myself. My first console was the 5200 back in 1983. I have nothing but great memories of spending hours upon hours playing games like Pac-Man, Vanguard, and games that allowed two-player fun and the like. I had so much fun with Wizard of War, I had to own the original. I recently paid $60 to get it complete, but the memories that it gave me are priceless. It's really a shame that voice was not added to this game, as was with Berserk. Maybe one day a talented homebrew programmer will pick up the challenge and make my dream come true. Both Bob and I have a passion for this greatest of pre-crash 8-bit consoles. I hope as you continue to follow the podcast, you will come to feel the same way, or at least respect what was and is the Super System, the Cadillac of video game consoles.
Couldn't agree more. Again, for myself and for David, I'm going to speak for both of us, but personally, I just want to say to Willie and RK, thank you so very much. I cannot thank these two guys enough. Willie invited me in while I was training to fly a brand new aircraft, and it was a great way to have fun during a very stressful time. I really attribute a lot of my current success, both in so many aspects of my life, in part to Willie and RK for bringing me into this and being part of this. It really has, it's worked on so many different levels for me. I know it sounds cheesy, but I'll tell you what, thank you for trusting me. Thank you for bringing me in. And I cannot thank the both of you enough.
I would also like to thank Willie and RK for letting me get my podcast start. When I listen to those old segments on the Atari 5200 Super podcast that I used to do, I sort of cringe at how green I was. But at least I hope that at that time I gave good reviews and good information. And hopefully, as we get more experience ourselves, Bob and I doing podcasting, we'll just get better and better at it.
That's the hope, and that's really it. You know, I tell my flight students from years ago, and very soon my very new flight students that are going to come down the line to me. You don't get good at this by doing it one time. You get good at it by doing it over and over and over again, and knowing where you make your mistakes, but also knowing where your successes are at. That's the most important thing. So, again, to the both of you, Willie and RK, thank you so very much. And I hope we do not let you down. I hope we really did do the 5200 justice on this podcast.
Well, hopefully we'll become seasoned veterans like them as well.
Yes. Well, David, how are we going to rate these games?
Well, Bob, I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a page out of the XCGS Cart by Cart podcast. That's a plug, by the way, people. And we're going to rate this on the criteria of graphics, sound and music, gameplay, presentation. Graphics, this is going to cover the visual experience of the game and how much effort the developer put into leveraging the graphical capabilities of the mighty 5200.
And that was one of the biggest things that was the selling point for this machine, was it bringing the arcade experience home. As we all know, way back when, the arcade was where you saw the best and the brightest video games that were able to be played. So our job is to see how these graphics match up to that and see how well they really true to form, or did they just kind of just phone it in. Let's take the quintessential example of Pac-Man. Everybody remembers the 2600 Pac-Man, where the graphics weren't even close to being what it was in the arcade. The 5200 tried to absolve that by bringing as much of the arcade graphics home as possible. So, where if we were to rate the graphics on the Atari 2600, we're looking at maybe a 3, maybe even a 2. Some people absolutely hate that game because of the graphics, but the gameplay is still somewhat solid. The 5200 try to get the gameplay, but bring those graphics home. So I would put the graphics for the 5200 maybe between a 7 and an 8.
Okay. Now the next category we're going to discuss is sound and music. This covers the complexity and creativity of the game music or sounds that are found in each game.
So, again, comparing it to, if we do have an arcade example, how close is it to that arcade example? If it's a completely, original game, how well do they utilize, how well do they do other things? One of the first things that comes to mind is the game Countermeasure, where they had some amazing sounds, amazing sound effects in all of that. It's a great game, and the sound effects just make it even better.
Well, I don't think we'll have to worry too much predominantly when it comes to sound and music due to the mighty pokey chip.
Absolutely. That was one of the most brilliant things ever developed by Atari, and it really does. It shows up in with the quality of the sound that you do get from the machine.
The next category will be gameplay. This is going to cover how the player is able to interact with the game. How engrossing is the game? Is it fun? Is it tedious? Has it variety, or is it just repetitious?
I have a good friend who develops video games for a living, and he said this. He goes, it doesn't matter how good the graphics are, how good the sounds are, how well it looks in the package or anything else. Long story short, is this a fun game to play?
Exactly. And the last will be presentation. This is going to cover non-gameplay aspects of the game, such as box, cover art, descriptions on the box, in-game intros, cutscenes, and any other features that gave depth to the end product.
And one of the things I've always loved about Atari is the graphics on the cover of the box. We can even go back to the 2600, especially with the 2600, where you had a little block going through a maze, being chased by these weird ducklings or whatever. I mean, everybody knows that I'm talking about adventure.
That's right.
But you look at the graphics on those boxes, and it ignited your imagination, and you were to apply that imagination to playing this game. I think that was one of the biggest connections that Atari did to the end user, which was, here's what we're imagining that you're doing. We can do this in a single high quality, beautifully rendered painting. Now plug in that video game and go to town. Have fun.
That's right. And start that imagination going.
Exactly.
But I have to say it, the Atari art of the 70s was epic.
In fact, just a quick little sidebar here. You know about the Art of Atari book that's going to be coming out here soon?
Yes, I've heard about it.
Yeah, I got it on pre-order from Amazon. I cannot wait to get a hold of this thing. It's going to bring back so many memories, and not only that, but just the artwork it's pure magic.
I agree. And after we get the sum of all those scores, we'll just give an overall score. It's going to be an average of all the above scored categories.
I like it. Yeah, whether it be 1 through 10 or so many this of so many that, one way or another, we're going to give you a good score. So whether or not you want to add this to your collection or not, or if you have an Atari Max, you're going to add it to your collection anyway. But how often will you want to play this game? Some games you want to play all day long. Other games you just want to kind of take a look at and go, okay, I see where they were going with it, but it may not be your cup of tea. But nonetheless, we want to give you a good score to make a good decision with.
Exactly. And we'll be right back after these important messages.
This is an arcade game. This is the new Atari Super System. Arcade? Atari Super System. You may like the Super System better. It has some of the best arcade and sports games. It even does something no arcade game can.
Telephone! It's Judy!
It lets you freeze the action.
Hello, Judy.
The new 5200 Super System.
If your dealer's sold out, keep trying. We're making them as fast as we can.
Welcome back, listeners. Now, we're going to talk about a little bit of the history of the 5200, its relationship to the Atari 400-800, its innovations, and how we got to the 5200. How did it come about? How was it realized? Yes.
The Kingdom was going to be built on the foundation of the Atari VCS. That was released in fall of 1977, and the Atari VCS, or Video Computer System, later renamed the Atari 2600, was originally released with 9 games. The VCS would come to dominate the industry for many years ahead.
Atari enjoyed strong sales in 1978 and a fantastic holiday season. By 1979, Atari continued to release more and more games, which met with continued success. However, Atari was now facing some stiffer competition from the Mattel Intellivision and the Magnavox Odyssey 2.
In 1980, the home version of Space Invaders came out. It was so popular that people were buying the Atari 2600 just so they could play Space Invaders at home. This is considered pretty much the first video game killer app.
And I think what we're going to find while we do this podcast, and just when you discuss Atari in general, they came up with a lot of firsts.
Yeah. In fact, Antic went ahead and interviewed Nolan Bushnell. I mean, I don't know how they were able to pull that one off, but crisp high fives to everybody over at Antic. When they interviewed Nolan Bushnell, and he said it best. He goes, what people never understood was that Atari was a technology company. It wasn't an entertainment company. That was a byproduct of the technology. So when Warner came in and purchased the place, they were like, oh no, we're here to, they figured selling video games was like selling records. It doesn't work that way.
Yes, and we found that out as history would come to teach us.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about the successor to the VCS that never came about. It's the Atari 3200, also known as Super Stella or Super Sylvia. According to engineering logs, in 1980 through 1981, Atari began work on a new video game console to replace the 2600. A popular myth stated that the new console was to be based on a new 10-bit processor that would have more memory, higher resolution graphics, and improved sound, while maintaining compatibility with all existing Atari VCS games. But before the design could be finalized, the feedback from the programmers was the console was too difficult to program. This detail has never been fully verified, but regardless, the 3200 was never meant to be.
Yeah, I can't see programming a 10-bit processor myself, and yeah, I could see where there would be some heartburn over the whole thing. But during the personal computer revolution, you had the release of machines like the Commodore PET, TRS-80, which I trained on when I was in junior high and high school, and the Apple II. These machines sold for much higher prices with higher profit margins than consoles.
Atari's management decided to enter this market, and the technology was repackaged into the 400 and 800. The chipset used for these machines was created with the mindset that the 2600 would be likely to be obsolete by the 1980 timeframe.
Yeah, and in November 1982, Atari released its newest and most powerful home video game console, originally shown as the Atari Video System X. And from this, the Atari 5200 was born.
With state-of-the-art technology brought over from the Atari 400-800 computer systems, the Atari 5200 represented a pushing of the envelope in video game systems. With start, pause, and reset buttons on its controllers, Atari was hoping to give its gamers the best they could offer.
And offer it did. I remember seeing that pause button. I mean, that blew my mind. Because when you played an Atari 2600 game, I mean, you were committed. This was like a marriage. You were committed to that game. You had to play it. But all of a sudden, you could hit pause. It was unheard of at the time.
Well, let me tell you, when you were playing 2600 games, many marriages came to divorce.
and pretty close today, too. But we won't talk about that.
No tangents. Remember, no tangents.
No tangents. Many people thought the Atari 5200 was Atari's answer to the ColecoVision, but it was actually the Atari 5200 was meant to be the Intellivision killer. Intellivision always boasted about its 16-position controller versus Atari's 8-position, so Atari fired back with a full 360-degree speed-sensitive joystick that was a brilliant engineering design. However, the joysticks were highly innovative, but they did not self-center, and we kind of know the rest of the story on that one from what everybody says about them.
Regardless of the controller's bad rap, we're going to shed some light on the controller. It's not all as bad as people would say it is. There's a lot of rumors going around, but just like rumors, they're not always true. But don't worry, stick with us, listeners. We'll put you straight.
Sounds good.
Now, it is interesting to note, up until this point, Atari was the fastest growing company in all history. Everybody wanted in on the action, and this market oversaturation is just one of the reasons that brought on the crash of '83.
And that's really it. I mean, Atari's meteoric rise, to call it nothing less. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely a meteoric rise. I've seen on YouTube interviews with Nolan Bushnell and everything. And the man took a $500 company. That was the money that he spent to file, the incorporation papers.
Sure.
And within 10 years, this is a $560 million company. It was meteoric in the way that it grew. And obviously, if you can grow a company that fast using technology, anybody else who had access to that technology wanted in as well.
Exactly. Now, let's talk a little bit about the differences between the 400-800 and the Atari 5200, as they're related, sort of, let's call them cousins.
Well, everybody, some of the differences between the 400 and the 800 versus the 5200. One of the things you will notice right away, the 5200 has no keyboard. The 400 and 800 10 kilobyte operating system was replaced with a simpler 2 kilobyte monitor program, of which 1 kilobyte is the built-in character set. A number of important registers, such as those with the GTIA and Pokey chips, appear at different memory locations, and the purpose of some registers also changed slightly on the 5200. The 5200's analog joysticks appeared as pairs of paddles to the hardware, which require different input handling to the traditional digital joystick input on the 400 and the 800.
Exactly. And of interest, Atari Corp would revisit the idea of a console-based Atari 8-bit computer hardware, and that is the XEGS system, the XE game system. It was a repackaged 65XE computer with a detachable keyboard. For more information on the XEGS, please see the Atari XEGS Cart by Cart podcast. Have I plugged my other podcast enough, Bob?
You're getting to it. I'm wondering how much money I'm going to start spending on eBay here to get an XEGS system, because I'm listening to the other podcast. I'm like, but I don't know. I just don't want to live in my truck.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so following the 5200's release, Atari had planned a smaller, cost-reduced version of the 5200, which would have removed the controller storage bin. It was code-named the Atari 5100, or the Atari 5200 Junior. Only a few fully working prototypes of the 5100 were made before the project was canceled. I've seen some pictures of it. It looks really sweet. I would love to have one.
I have seen a couple of pictures. Yeah, it looks like a really, if you lack the space, if you just wanted to get something a little bit more streamlined, that would be definitely what you would want to go for.
Sadly, on May 21st, 1984, during a press conference at which the Atari 7800 was introduced, company executives revealed that the 5200 had been discontinued just after 2 years. Tragedy, man. That was a bad decision.
I honestly think it was. It really was. And we can get into a bunch of different facets here on the politics and the business practices of the Tramiel family and everything else, but we won't. but really, I just don't think it was a really good idea you have your flagship piece of equipment out there and you're just going to drop all support to it. I think it was just a bad idea.
I do own a couple of Atari 7800s, and there are some games that are quite good on the system. But if I were just take a look at cosmetic looks, it looks like a Cadillac parked next to a Datsun.
Yeah. It's a great machine. Don't get me wrong.
It's a great machine. No,
it's a great machine. But there's something about that Pokey chip that brings that sound out and everything else, and it's like, man, it's just incomparable. It had performance, but it just didn't have, what do they call it, the je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, or we'll just call it an English sound.
There you go.
Okay. But remember, we both love the 7800. We both own the 7800. We also support people purchasing the 7800 and buying some excellent homebrew games from Atari Age.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I just don't want Phil, the no swear gamer, egging my house as he drives
exactly.
by.
Or that computer chasing us and getting into our systems and erasing all our show notes.
Absolutely.
Okay. So during the course of Atari's support of the Atari 5200, 9 revisions of the Atari 5200 joystick were made. The rubber base was made thicker, the joystick stock was shortened, and the flex circuit was improved. Atari was also working on a new self-centering joystick as well as an arcade joystick. I would have loved for those things to have come out.
I'm not gonna jinx it.
Okay.
I don't know yet, but I might have a line on some of those self-centering joysticks from Atari.
Okay, be quiet.
I'm not saying a word.
Okay.
It could be complete rumor, but
okay,
there is a hope.
Okay. And with that, The Atari 5200 was canceled before these new controllers were completed and released. Now, the 5200 enjoyed moderate success, but never reached the overall success of its predecessor, the Atari 2600. Resources that should have been allocated to the 5200 game development went instead to the 2600.
A lot of those resources that were going back into the that should have been allocated for the 5200 went into the 2600, including programmers. Programmers wanted to program for the 2600 more than the 5200, and this had nothing to do with the technology. That had nothing to do with developing a better game or anything else. This came down to simply money. The 2600 had bigger print numbers than the 5200. So at the time, as we all know how people left to go form Activision and Magic, different companies, Atari finally figured out, hey, if we pay our programmers, they're going to be sticking around. So they started bonus programs. And one of the things that they did was this bonus program for how many of the game that you just developed, how many of them were printed, that's how much money you got. People were taking 6-month vacations off of the money and the bonuses that they were getting. Mm-hmm. So there was more more printing, I should say, on the 2600 than there was for the 5200. That's why all the programmers wanted to program for the old VCS, because the 5200 just didn't have the print numbers that they were looking for.
Yeah, it didn't have the install base.
Exactly. So the first Atari 5200 systems were not compatible with the 2600, which engineers did argue about, but it put off many 2600 owners who had accumulated a substantial library of games for the system. A VCS adapter, which allowed 2600 games to be played on the 5200, was later released, but the video game crash in 1983 prevented any hopes of it promoting further sales for the 5200. The original 4-port version had one of the earliest automatic TV switch boxes of any video game system. That was always one of the big selling points for me, because I hated getting up and flipping that switch box in the back of the television. But for most consoles of the age, a manual switch box was used, meaning that the user had to flip a switch in order to change from game playing to watching TV. The 2-port system returned to a more conventional separation between TV output and power input. The Atari 5200 was only produced with NTSC television output. There is no PAL version, let alone CCAM. It was only available in North America.
Now, I want to just go back to the automatic TV switch boxes.
Yes.
I just wanted to say I really liked the automatic TV switch box. I never had any issues with it. It worked flawlessly. It was awesome. And exactly as you said, as soon as you shut off the 5200, your TV signal came back on.
I thought it was the slickest. It was the slickest feature of that machine. I love that. And again, like I said, when I go to the back of the television, I got to flip this box, I got to come back and everything else. But it was just so cool to just hit a button and everything happened like it should.
Let's talk a little bit about Atari 5200 games versus Atari 8-bit versions. Now, some Atari 5200 game versions were actually better than their 8-bit counterparts. So I took a little bit of a look at some Atari Age threads, and I tried to find threads that had to do with, comparing the two versions of games. And these are some of the comments I found. Kicks was tons better on the 5200 in both gameplay and sound. Star Raiders was identical, except for the fact that on the 5200, it had analog control, which was a great addition. Space Dungeon, you got to actually have dual analog control, which you couldn't have on the Atari 8-bit version. Missile Command plays awesome with the analog stick. Dig Dug, Centipede, and Kicks versions are way better on the 5200. And then I also see here that apparently Defender on the 8-bit version requires you to have to press the space bar, I believe, to release the smart bomb.
Interesting.
Yeah, while with the 5200, you've got all the controls right in your hand, right?
You got them right in your hand. It is a little awkward just because of the design of the controller, but like most things, these things can be mitigated, and we're going to be talking about that here in just a little bit. And with that, we'll be back after these important messages.
Galaxian. Now where you been? You'll make the days roll on by, blasting bugs out of the sky. Well, you know deep down that it's gonna be a hummer, 'cause nobody's hotter than Atari this summer. Nobody's hotter than Atari this summer.
This summer, the really hot video games come from Atari. We've got Centipede, Ms. Pac-Man, Vanguard, and Galaxian. If you thought it was going to be just another summer, Atari is going to turn your head around.
The hot names, the hot games, the hot feels. Yeah, it's gonna be a hummer, 'cause nobody's hotter than Atari this summer. Nobody's hotter than Atari this summer.
Well, listeners, welcome back, and now we're going to get down to what you're going to need to get started playing and using the Atari 5200.
So you have a choice between the 4-port and the 2-port model. All 2 ports work with the 2600 adapter. Some Asterix model 4 ports also work with the 2600 adapter. Best Electronics sells a new 4-port motherboard with a mod that allows it to use the 2600 adapter. The 2600 adapter is actually a self-contained 2600 system that just uses the 5200 for power and video output.
Which is something I never knew. I always thought it was like some sort of other thing and everything, and it worked within the computer itself. But no, I never knew that it was its own standalone 2600 that was just using it for power and video output. I'm partial to the 4-port. I own a 4-port. If you already own a 2600, the 4-port is going to be fine for you. I prefer the self-switching box. I think it's a really cool feature of the 4-port system. I always thought it was how these systems were supposed to operate in the first place. There have been issues with the power supply, but Best Electronics has a procedure to do a proper hookup. Nonetheless, you need a 5200, 2 joysticks, and you have to get a Master Play or a Master Play clone. It allows you to use digital controllers on the 5200. It's a huge advantage for games such as Joust or Pac-Man.
Exactly, Bob. And what we're going to do as part of our reviews, as we go through each game, we're going to play them with the original controller, we'll play them with the Master Play or the Master Play clone, and we're going to tell you guys what controls are best for each game. Believe it or not, there will be some games where the original controller will be better, but for the majority of games, you're going to need that digital accuracy.
Yes.
And we'll go into that per game as we review them. Excellent. Now, another item that you're going to need is the legendary Atari Max Ultimate SD cartridge. This is a must-own for all Atari 5200 owners and enthusiasts. What this cartridge does is it allows you to play images or ROMs. And also, when you buy it, you get an awesome 5200 homebrew called Beef Drop. So if you ever love Burger Time, this is an awesome version of that, and you get that. It's included with the purchase. Now, the cost is a little steep. It's $129.95 plus $6 shipping, which is going to include the Ultimate SD cartridge, a digital version of Beef Drop, and some bonus games and a pre-configured SD card. It is a bit steep in the beginning, but trust me, if you're a person who's not into actually collecting all 69 original cards, this is actually money well spent.
And, one of the things that I do is I have this Atari Max. I have the older version of it where you have to plug it into your computer using a USB mini cord and everything else. One of the things that Willie used to do, and he probably still does, is that he just takes the Atari Max cart, plugs it into the machine, and he leaves it there. So you're not pulling it out, pushing it in, pulling it out, pushing it in, which obviously it's a friction point. It's going to start wearing things away and everything else. This way, it actually stays in the machine and it protects those contacts.
Now, the only one drawback I can see about leaving the cart in there all the time is that the pins that are pressing against the actual cartridge connections never get to fully relax.
True. There is that. So you might want to... Yeah, I always pull mine out every once in a while.
Yeah.
And, there are a few games that I don't know what it is with me, but there's something about the whole tangibility of grabbing a cartridge, putting it into the machine, and playing it. It was kind of, it's just something weird that I do, but I already have it on the Atari Max. It works just fine, but yet there's something about grabbing the actual cartridge. I think it's the collector in me.
Yeah.
I just have to. Well, I know I'm playing the actual game, and the code is all there. Everything's there. But something about it, just reaching, opening that box, going through the motions and everything else, and being part of that experience is, I don't know. I really connect with it.
Well, exactly. If listeners will go to our Facebook page, what you're going to see, you're going to see a set of photos that deal with pickups, our pickups, and you're going to see there I picked up a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you have been really going to town.
Well, I'm kind of known. All my hosts know on the Atari XCGS Card by Card podcast.
Yeah, plug
again. That when I kind of get into something, I jump into the deep end of the pool.
Yeah, see, I used to do that. I was really good at it, actually, but I also realized that I'm putting a 7-year-old through private school. And, the disposable income of which I used to have is pretty much non-existent now. But I got to tell you, every once in a while I go on eBay and I see a 5200. Yeah, it's such a good deal. I gotta get it. So 5200 cartridges, 2600 cartridges, and I'm dabbling with the 7800 now.
Yep.
I'm holding myself back on that. It's like, all right, but nonetheless, you see a good deal, you got to get it, and the collector in me just has to have it.
That's something we both have in common. We'll have to work on it.
I'm sure there's a Video Game Collectors Anonymous somewhere out there. So,
well, let's put you this way: starting a podcast and reviewing all 69 episodes, I don't think is a good start.
Yeah.
I think we'll join Collectors Anonymous after we finish the podcast.
Sounds good. Let's do it. I am Bob, and I'm a collector.
That's it. Now let's talk just briefly about 5200 console modifications. Now, as most people may know, the 5200 outputs an RF signal, which is not always the best looking, and that doesn't always translate that well to LCD TVs and things. So it is possible to get AV mods or S video mods that can be done to the 5200. Now, if you're looking for one, there's these great set of people on Atari Age. There's members there who will mod your system for you. Of course, it'll cost you some money, but what you'll be able to do is, instead of going through the RF signal with a coax cable converter into the coax input of your TV, you can go straight to the television's component, getting a better picture and possibly better sound. Now, I myself bought a 4-port 5200 modded with an S-Video from a great Atari Age member, Grips03. Or if you're really impatient and you have money to spend, then there are a few eBay sellers that will sell you a pre-modded 5200 for a paltry sum of maybe like $250.
Oh, piece of cake. Hold on. I'll just... No, I'm really intrigued by that. But I know, I don't know, is old school a forbidden term to use?
No.
Like back in the...
I'm sorry, but anybody who has any problems with colloquialisms like back in the day, get over it.
And I think Ferg has.
I think so.
He didn't know what kind of thing he let loose upon the community here. But no, I in fact I hate to say this, I go around to garage sales. If I'm driving around, I see a garage sale. I see if they have an old CRT monitor or old television sitting around, because they're giving them away for like $10. Just get it out of my yard, because I can't afford the hazmat disposal on this thing. And I'm like, Gladly. I'm really intrigued by the Best Electronics motherboard mod to have a 4-port run the 2600 adapter. I just recently purchased one of those. I personally run everything off of CRT, old, just good old CRT televisions and everything else. So the S mod, I don't know if I necessarily want to go in that direction. Probably someday. But I'd love to get that motherboard because the collector in me would love to have a 2600 adapter for the 4-port. But like I said, I just got a 5200 for parts, and hopefully, I don't know. I'm leaving the door open for things. Maybe it's going to become an S-modded digital one, or maybe it's going to become a giveaway. I don't know. Stay tuned.
Okay. So we'll just quickly talk about the mighty trackball for the 5200, the best trackball in the business for the 8-bit systems.
I think it's probably the best peripheral that has ever been made for any system.
Now, I just recently received my CX53 trackball. I've never really used one, so I'm really looking forward to trying it out on games like Centipede, Missile Command, and one of my favorite games, Tempest. So as we go on, we're going to let people also know, is this game trackball compatible? How does it work with a trackball? Because sometimes there's a lot of games that even though you wouldn't think you could play them with a trackball, they actually work very well with one.
And there are games where they say you can play it with a trackball if you actually are able, and I got mine early on before the craze really hit. On the back of the CX53 box, it'll say, hey, you can play, all these games with the trackball, and one of them's Defender. And let me tell you, it is the lyingest lie that has ever been lied. The Defender is completely unplayable with the trackball. Okay. Trust me, I've tried.
Okay, see? You see, people, you're going to get the true facts out of this podcast.
Absolutely. We're doing the dirty work for you.
Okay. And fun, dirty work it is.
Absolutely.
Now, I just want to briefly talk about the Master Play clone. I don't actually own the original Master Play. I own the Master Play clone, which allows me to use a Genesis controller. And I purchased it from Atari Guy 1021. He sells them on eBay, and you can also purchase it directly from him on Atari Age by contacting him. And I have to tell you, this is an amazing device. I'm very happy to have it. Like I said, most of the games work very well with digital control, and exactly like how you were talking about Defender works great with the Master Play clone.
Yeah, absolutely. And also all the digital games, Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, etc. They all work great with the Master Play. I was fortunate enough to get in really early. I was able to buy a Master Play new in box from. And it was from, I forgot who it was on eBay, but it was an Electric Concepts Master Play, new in box. I still use it, and I actually have a little tag on eBay to say when one of these things comes up, let me know about it. And I don't think I've seen one come up probably in at least the last year to year and a half. The originals are extremely rare, and the last one I saw looked like it had been dug up at the bottom of a mud puddle, and I think it went for somewhere in the neighborhood of $225.
Wow.
So, yeah. I'm kind of ashamed to say I got mine for $60. Which I'm still going, wow. But again, I picked that up about 2.5-3 years ago, and it really completely changes anything bad that anybody says about this game system because of the controllers. It's a moot point because the Master Play fixes it.
Also, there's a PC to 5200 adapter cable that's also sold by Atari Age member Bohoki, which is Bohoki. And this adapter allows you to plug in many different PC controllers to use with your 5200. Now, thinking about controllers and alternative controllers, I understand that you have one of the Wico controllers.
Yeah, I actually have 3 of them. I have one good one that it still works, but is a little little loose and everything. And then I have one that does work, but I'm kind of considering it for parts. I haven't got into each one of them yet. But the Wiko is actually what the Atari 5200 self-centering controllers were going towards, which was self-centering. The only problem with them is that I honestly think that there's too many adjustments with it. You can unlock the gimbaling system that's within it to get everything centered. So you, if I'm going to use some plain terms here, not plain terms, but actual airplane terms. Okay. There's something called trim, where when you trim out an aircraft perfectly for cruise flight, you can take your hands off the yoke and the plane flies straight and level in unaccelerated flight, and it's basically like an arrow that'll just go on forever. There's a couple of trim tabs on the Wiko controller, so you have to unlock the gimbaling, get the thing centered as best as possible, lock the gimbaling back in, and then fine-tune the trim to where it centers up. So a game that I would use to do this calibration would be Star Raiders, because it gives me, it gives me a reticle, it gives me a crosshair, and it's fairly, it's easy to see the visual input.
Sure.
The only problem is I have to do all of that before I play the game. It completely takes it away. But if you have a 2600, the old baseball bat Wiko controller, for the 2600, and you hold it up against the 5200 Wiko controller, the quality it's almost like night and day. The 2600 controller is a far more superiorly built piece of equipment than the 5200. The 5200 one, I'm going to describe it as this: it's a tad sketchy. But if you're looking for a self-centering joystick for the 5200, the Wiko one's the one to go.
And you got to have a lot of money, let me tell you, because I've seen these things go for big money. There was a guy recently selling brand new Wiko 5200 controller along with the keypad, and he was asking something like $278.
Yeah, oh yes, I've been watching those.
Yeah, we've all been watching.
I would I'd love to throw it down, but I like to eat. And
well, I'll be honest with you. I sent him a message and I said, "Would you consider $200?" And I received silence.
Silence.
Wow.
Sometimes that speaks louder than words. And there we go.
Yeah, it's called no. Anyway.
Not just no, but I ignore you outright.
Okay, Bob, let's call Steve and get him in.
We interrupt this program to bring you this important message. During the recording of Steve Averett's segment, we had internet issues which resulted in my audio not being recorded. As such, the following segment has been edited to sound like a conversation between Steve and Bob. It's still chocked full of info. We now return you to the show already in progress.
First of all, let's give a big hand for Steve from the Wired Up Retro YouTube channel, and Steve is one of the greats here because he has figured out how to get many controllers to work on the 5200. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm glad to be here. I'm really honored that I can be a guest on your first episode. That's awesome.
Well, again, thank you.
Well, I just started up my channel back in December, and I really have heavily concentrated on classic game systems, and the 5200 has been a chief focus. Definitely very interested in that game system, and I've had a 5200 since right around 1994 when I stumbled upon it at a thrift store, Salvation Army in Findlay, Ohio, for about $2.65, and when I found it that day, I had already been collecting games for the 5200, and in the end, I kind of had a mini collection going on anyways, and I thought, well, I guess I better grab this system while it's here cheap. So anyway, I really love that system. It's turned into really my favorite classic system. I really enjoy all the Ataris, 7800, 2600, and as a kid, I had a 2600, and I still play it quite a bit to these days, and
So yeah, I really wanted to spread the joy of the 5200. A lot of people don't recognize that it's really a worthwhile console because they keep hearing all the bad reputation of the controllers for the console, and it keeps them from wanting to even, locate one and start playing the games on it because of the reputation that precedes it. And I kind of set out to make some changes so that people can, recognize that it might be worthy of a second look.
I think it's more than worthy of a second look. I mean, it really comes down to the analog controllers work for some things, for some of the games, but really, I always thought this was kind of the sad thing about it was, they always pushed this to be the personal arcade machine. Well, when you go to the arcade, what are the machines? They're not analog, they're digital. So all of a sudden you're taking these digital programs, bringing them into the home, and you're playing with an analog joystick. It was really a huge Achilles heel for those particular games. Now, other games like Centipede, Missile Command, Star Raiders, etc., they're great with an analog controller. But if you try to play Pac-Man, Joust, it kind of goes out the window. But Steve, how did you start focusing on getting different controllers? Like I said a little bit earlier, my whole big thing is, the interface between man and machine. That's pretty much what my job is based off of. I fly for a airline, and, between me and the plane, I gotta get this thing through the air and everything, and I gotta feel, I gotta get a feel for what this machine is doing. So it's always been a big thing for me between myself and the controllers and playing the actual game. It's one and the same. How did you start getting into the 5200 and searching for different ways to control these games?
Well, I did get two working controllers when I first bought the system, and but I noticed after 4 or 5 years that there was some, even issues with the controllers working correctly. I think mainly it was just, you had to push the buttons in harder, and it wasn't so much the joystick that was an issue, but the buttons themselves, and they do oxidize a little bit over the years, and that's kind of one of the drawbacks of that controller. So I ended up, instead of taking the thing apart and polishing it down or adding metal pieces of foil, gold foil in there, I just bought a Wico 5200 joystick. And then I also ended up buying a Competition Pro joystick, which is purely a digital joystick. And I just used, between the two of them, I could play all my games and feel like, wow, I'm getting pretty good control here. And it's not bad at all. And that was probably in around 96 or 98. And then, I kind of stopped playing 5200 for a while there. And just around, 2013, 2014, especially 2015, I kind of decided that there's more things that are worth looking into, and I really started getting plugged in at Atari Age into the forums there. And there was a guy whose name is Bohoki, and he was making an adapter that allows you to use old school PC controllers with the 15-pin plug, the game port controllers on your 5200. And these adapters he was making at $12 a pop, and I went ahead and bought two from him. And I had collected. I'm a controller collector.
I started down that road, but I had to hit the detour because it was I know what you're talking about with the Wico controllers. I own 3 of them myself, and I was able to get one of the keypads, and that's kind of like my go-to setup, which is using a original Electric Concepts Master Play along with a Wico keypad and a micro switch Atari CX40 joystick that I modified myself and everything. That's kind of like my go-to setup for playing the 5200 for just those straight digital arcade video games. Yeah,
definitely. Well, in the PC controller realm, there's all sorts of different analog and digital controllers that now can be used with the 5200. So that kind of got me really excited about the possibilities of enjoying my 5200 games. And then I looked into the Master Play Interface clone. I never had a Master Play Interface, and I always wanted one. Obviously, I wanted the game media rights with it, but For some reason, I could never find that at any thrift store. But
I don't think anybody. Well, I know a few people have and everything else, and it doesn't come cheap.
no, it doesn't. No. But when I found out that Atari Guy 1021, who is he goes by that handle on Atari Age and also on eBay, was selling those, I ended up working out a trade deal with him. He was looking for a new console, and I managed to hook him up. So he got me one, and I ended up, putting that up on my Wired Up Retro channel and kind of reviewed it and went over the different things you can do with it. And it's really pretty exciting as well, because it allows you to use those Genesis controllers with 2-button compatibility, and it's a whole lot of fun. It really is. Having that D-pad on the 5200 is just so fantastic for games like anything from Defender to Pac-Man or Ms. Pac-Man, Dig Dug. Those games are the ones that first spring to mind. Just great for a D-pad, especially if you've been, into PlayStation and PlayStation 2 and 3 and 4. On all the Xbox consoles, you get so used to using a D-pad after all these years, you kind of want to try it out on a 5200. That allows you to do it. But I remember back in the 90s, I had a very hard time becoming a D-pad guy. It was definitely not what I really wanted. And when I've got an NES for the first time, I really struggled, especially on my 2600, trying to play with a Genesis controller, games like Missile Command. I just was terrible with the D-pad, and I was pretty convinced I was never going to like it. But I guess over a decade and a half, I got better.
Steve, I just want to say thank you for saying this, because I thought it was only me that was going through this experience. I remember seeing the Nintendo NES controller the first time. I mean, here it is, Mr. Interactivity, and I pick up this controller, and I'm like, what is this? This isn't a controller.
Am I right?
Yeah, I was like, oh, what? This isn't right. This isn't even wrong. It's not anything. And yeah, so anyways, Steve, thank you for saying that, and not only that, but from hearing you guys speak and everything, I got to catch up. I'm behind the times here. I want to check out these D-pads and everything else, and actually give it a shot and see what kind of scores I can rack up with these things.
And the analog thumbsticks, it's kind of a new thing as well. And that controller that you ended up picking up for the PC, the Mako Pad PC, it's got a really tall analog stick for your thumb. So it does work actually pretty well on playing games like Star Wars the Arcade on the 5200. And
cool.
It even works for, Missile Command and Breakout, any of those analog games. That's kind of a nice thumbstick for that. But, nothing really beats the actual joystick that you can grab with your entire hand and hold in your fist. That's really where it's at.
I agree.
And there are very few PC controllers that'll work with that PC to 5200 adapter that have a thumbstick that would be analog. Now, another thing I will mention is that if you buy the Atari Guy 1021 Master Play Interface clone that works with 2600 and Genesis controllers, I've actually, on one of my episodes, shown how to add another adapter to allow PlayStation controllers to work on the 5200. And so you're actually combining like 3 adapters to get it to work. But none of the Master Play Interface clone is purely digital when it comes to adapting Genesis or PlayStation controllers.
Right.
Not going to have that lovely analog stick working in an analog way.
Right.
So if you want the analog stick working, you have to buy one of those PC Mako pads. So that's really where the fun is at with the thumbsticks being analog.
I got to try that out. That's boy, I got to catch up.
Oh yeah, it is very nice. And you can like grasp it between your thumbs and use it that way, or you can just hold your thumb on top of it and move it around. I've tried it both ways, and it definitely does what it's supposed to. But yeah, I mean, is it as great as the Wicco stick? There's probably going to be some controversy about that. And it all depends on what you're used to. If you're really into playing thumbstick games on your PlayStation, you're probably going to like the Mako Pad PC on your 5200 better than a Wiko stick. But, old guys like me, I probably am going to say, you know what, that Wiko stick is just so great. So, it's a tough one. I will say, I just found out a little secret, and this has to do with the 5200. The company Wiko made the 5200 controller with its 2 buttons. They also, within a few years of that, made an identical controller for the PC that looks just the same, except it's got some different colors on the base. Kind of a more
really?
Color, yeah. So what I did was I bought that. I found it on eBay. Someone was selling it used for, I don't know, it was untested. It was like $8. And so I recently bought that, and I put it with Bohoki's adapter for the PC, and lo and behold, it looks just identically to the 5200 Wiko. And it looks pretty much identical to it as well, since it's made by Wiko. So that might be a cheap way for some people to enjoy that stick, is to get the Bohoki adapter and buy the version of the
Yeah, I was just about to say, I'm jumping on eBay right now to try to soak these things up.
Unfortunately, it's very uncommon. It is. I found one initially, probably 4 or 5 months ago, that was being sold in the box for over $60, and I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be getting that. But then somebody threw one up on eBay, I don't know, a couple months ago, and it didn't come with a box, and it said untested, and that's the one I got for like $8. So, you just got to keep your eyes peeled, I guess.
I hear you. But, one of the things that I want to touch on here, and Steve, this is kind of, it's one of those background things, but, you talk about, old guys like us. I don't know how old you are, but, we are men of a certain age, I guess you could say. We grew up with the 2600, the 5200. Yep. We had very large interfaces to play the video games. And, the new generation of kids, they grew up with the NES. They grew up with the PlayStation and everything else where inputs were smaller and Absolutely. They worked with a different controller. I think what's great about this is if you want to play it one way, you can. But this opens up, using these newer controllers and everything, opens up a world to the newer generations to see where the PlayStation and everything else came from. And they can actually have a sense of familiarity enjoying these retro video games with what you have done.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is definitely opening it up to the whole, just the younger crowd. And I think that's a great thing for the younger generation to appreciate, where we've been in the past and really how great it was, how great it is, to enjoy these games. Yeah, I use the trackball with the Master Play Interface clone made by Atari Guy 1021. And I'm just using either a 2600 trackball, which is purely digital, or I'm using a Sega Sports Pad, which is a trackball made for the Master System or Genesis. And again, it has an analog mode switch and it has a digital mode switch. So, but again, with the Master Play Interface clone, you're going to purely use it for digital. So I ended up trying it on Defender on the 5200. And I was really excited because, the original 5200 trackball with Defender is terrible. It isn't.
We just talked about that.
So when I plugged in the 2600 trackball or even the Sega one, it controlled it very well. I was getting a fast movement of the ship, which just totally changed the game.
Oh, very cool.
So it's very much worth a try if you get the Master Play Interface clone. Yeah.
Awesome, Steve. Thank you for that. I think I'm gonna get one now, just so I can put away my original Master Play, just so I don't put the wear and tear on it.
Yeah.
It comes with a little extra button, and it has a little bit of stickum tape. I've never used it. I don't want to take it out of its little baggie, but yeah, it's kind of this. It's Mickey Mouse little cord that plugs into it, and you Velcro it, or like I said, it has a little piece of sticky tape on it where you can stick it onto a CX40 if you want to, and that's your secondary fire button.
Yeah.
Until it falls off or breaks or gets lost or whatever.
So rare. They are really so rare. I mean, when you find them on eBay, they're going for $70, and that hardly ever comes with the little button. So,
I was going to say the last one I saw that didn't come with a little button, it looked like it had been dug up out of the bottom of a swamp or something. It went for about $225. So, yeah.
Oh, I haven't checked those auctions in a while, have I?
Yeah, no, that's okay. You don't want to. It's too expensive. Stay away.
My eyes might roll up in the back of my head if I looked at that.
It's you know, and if you can get a great one, you know, that works. That's you know, modern built and everything else. Why would you? The only reason I got it was because it was serendipity. I was able to be there at the right place at the right time and pick this thing up, and I was able. And I talked about it earlier in the podcast where I was able to get mine for $60 new in package.
Awesome! Wow, amazing.
Yeah, I want to just seal it into a hermetically sealed box and just stare at it, but I enjoy using it too much. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things where when it does pop up, get ready, because I honestly think that the new reproduction ones that are made are far more worth the money than, unless you're a hardcore collector, just go with the reproduction.
Yeah. Well, I believe, doesn't the original Master Play have some fine-tuning buttons on it, or am I mistaken?
Nothing. The original Master Play clone actually has a switch on it where you can switch between analog and digital. And the whole idea was that you took your Atari CX40, plugged it into it, and you took your Atari 5200 controller and plugged it into it. So when you went digital, you use the joystick function.
Sure.
Use the joystick function for the CX40, but you still had keyboard or keypad functionality from the 5200. When you switch it back to analog, it basically just mainlines the 5200 analog joystick and disables the 2600 joystick. That's pretty much all it does. There's no fine tuning. I can tell you right now, there's no fine tuning on it whatsoever.
Yeah, well, that fine-tuning solves all problems with the original Master Play on pretty much all the games that are digital. But yeah, if you're going to play anything that, let's say Breakout, for instance, you're not going to be able to use that 2600 or Genesis controller on that. But you can use the paddles, which fortunately Atari Guy 1021 made compatible with it. So. There is an analog capability there in that adapter. The thing is, there's a little trick. You have to open up your paddle, and you have to switch the two wires. And I showed, I think, in episode number 4, if I'm not mistaken, of my Wired Up Retro channel, how to do that. It's very simple. You do have to have either a soldering iron, or you have to take the wire and tie it to the posts. But it's really not complicated to do that switch. Yeah, but once you do that, then it all works well. Yeah, on Breakout. Well, there is a couple of games, let's say Space Invaders and Galaxian, that also can be pretty compatible with that as well. So it'll give you if you're just moving the paddle slightly to the right, the ship will move slower to the right. But if you move paddle a little further, then you go into that faster speed. So it's a variable speed of just 2 different levels. So it'll work on games like Galaxian and Space Invaders. Mm-hmm. And I've contemplated spinners. I definitely am into the idea of using a spinner on the 5200. There is in fact a GamePort PC controller that's a spinner that I've spotted on eBay, and I had a little conversation with Bohoki about that. And there are some PC controllers that are 15-port or 15-pin plug controllers that don't work with Bohoki's adapter because they're not the old school 15-pin. It's like they came with software that was designed to allow them to have a little bit more complexity. But the one I spotted on eBay that was a spinner is one of those that came with software. So he said that your 99% chance it's not going to work on the 5200 with the PC adapter. And I was a little disappointed to hear that. But, there's eventually going to be somebody who makes a low-priced spinner that you could use on 5200 Tempest. And boy, when that day comes, I will definitely be buying Tempest ASAP.
Well, I was going to say, Stephen, I think you need to say right here, challenge accepted.
That would be incredible. And I'm figuring that we're going to be hearing from people who figured out how to do it. As to how simple it is, I don't know, but it might be one of the projects for Atari Guy 1021 to take on and put on eBay for hopefully less than $50. But if it has to be more, it'll probably be worth it. So yeah. Personally,
I just want to say I need more free time. I need a lot more free time. This is like Tinker City. I would chip away at this and eventually figure it out. But yeah. We all need to band together and get this done.
Yeah, I agree. That would be such a blast. It really would be.
Absolutely.
Well, like I said, that one PC controller has a spinner knob on top. I'm kind of still tempted to buy it because, there's that 1% chance that that it would actually work. So, I don't know. I'm very tempted.
Well, I'll tell you what, like I always tell myself, it's like if it's cheap enough, it's worth a shot.
Absolutely. If it doesn't work, I could still hook it up to my PC and be able to play emulators with the spinner. So, might as well, right? So, yeah.
Might as well.
Yeah. There's one more possible option, and that is to buy Bohoki's PC to 5200 adapter and connect to it another adapter that's made by a guy from Greece who's on eBay, and he goes by the handle Icons GR74. It's IKONS GR, which I assume stands for Greece, 74. And okay. So he's made an adapter that basically allows you to plug an Atari 2600 controller and have a PC 15-pin controller at the end of it. So you take that adapter that Icons GR74 makes, plug it into both of these, and now you're using certain 2600 digital controllers on your 5200. So it's kind of like the poor man's way of doing a master play interface.
I was going to say it sounds like a master play of a master play.
Exactly. but I bought it on eBay for less than $15, and was pleasantly surprised that it worked with a number of my 2600 sticks on my 5200 on the digital games, Pac-Man, Dig Dug, those kinds. And for some reason it didn't work with my original 2600 sticks made by Atari, but it did work with my Slick stick. It worked with my Flashback 2 joystick that looks just like an Atari 2600 stick, and it worked with couple other controllers that are 2600 compatible that I have. So anyway, it might be worth looking into if you don't want to spend $80 on a Master Play interface clone, but getting this for a little extra cheap can be well worth it if you have the right controller.
Sounds great, Steve. I was going to say, Steve, it's getting kind of late and everything. But what I was going to ask we do have a pretty big community of 5200 owners and enthusiasts out there. Is there anything you want to say to them before we call it a night?
Well, I just want to say, I think if we do unite and get even better controllers for these particular games that really need them, that this community will become larger, and I'm looking forward to that day when we can see not just the guys that are over 45 and 50 enjoying these games, but everybody. So can't wait to see the community expand.
I was going to say, sorry, Dave, but I was going to say, I think you've went a long ways and made some amazing steps in that direction. That it's not just the old guys here. I don't want to call myself old or any of us old, but to bring the younger generation in and kind of see what built us. I thank you for everything that you've done.
Yeah, well, there's going to be more. I've got a couple new ideas coming. I'm not going to reveal what they are, but a couple of unique things having to do with the 5200 will be on an upcoming episode. I would say sometime in the next 2 months.
Sounds great. Right. Looking forward to it.
I'm going to enjoy each and every podcast, And I'll definitely rejoin you one of these days, not in the too distant future.
Anytime,
All right.
Stephen. Hey, thank you so very much. And again, thank you for being with us on the show.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Gentlemen, that was Steve Averett. He is part of the, he's not just part, he is the Wired Up Retro YouTube channel. Great talking with him and everything else, and breathing new life into these great retro machines. Anyways, you know, the great thing about the 5200 was that the arcade games either met or came close to bringing this arcade experience at home. And those of us who grew up in the early 80s and everything remember that, you know, to go to the arcade was not only a social experience, but it was a really cool experience just to get in touch with the technology. We wanted to bring this technology home because even though we wanted to go to the arcade, we just didn't have the time or the money or both to do it. The original games for the 5200 system showed the potential for the console. The prototypes showed that developers were pushing the technology of this console, and the homebrewers of today demonstrate to this day that what amazing capabilities that the 5200 had.
Exactly. And you know what? As time goes on, the 5200 Super system is getting more and more super.
Yeah, the work that Steve's doing, the work that Atari Age member Bohoki is doing, Atari guy, who was it? Atari Guy
1021.
Atari Guy 1021. I mean, all the work that they are doing obviously show their dedication and their love of the system and everything else. And it's not just breathing new life into the system, but it's bringing new generations into it as well.
Exactly. And just before we end the show, Bob, there's a new overlay project for the 5200, as some games for the 5200 never had overlays. These are overlays with new designs. They look very classy, great graphics on them, and they're also for games that never actually came with overlays. So if you really like the 5200 and you would like to have overlays for games that never had overlays, we'll put the link in the Facebook page, and go on over there and put in your feedback that you're interested in these things so that this project can actually come to fruition. And with that, we'll call it a night. We want to thank everybody for listening. Bob and I, we were so happy to actually start this podcast. I'm sure you guys are actually happy that we finally have an episode out. And
hey, honor and a privilege. I mean, again, thanks to Willie and RK. You know, and really, you know, they set the foundation. We're just going to build on it. We're just going to go forward, and we're going to honor the past, and we're going to lay new the future. It's really kind of exciting. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is our first episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. We've given you every opportunity to build your 5200 Dream System. Again, a special thanks to Steve for coming on the show and being interviewed and everything, and giving us various options for the 5200 controllers and everything else. For our next episode, we are finally going to review a couple of games. We decided to go with games that harken back to our childhood. David nominated Wizard of War. I'm nominate Countermeasure. So those are going to be the next two games on the 5200 podcast.
And now that you guys know the games that we're going to be reviewing, you now have the opportunity to give us your feedback. You have audio submissions, you have written feedback. Run on over to our Facebook page, or you could visit our Atari at Atari Age. You can visit our official thread for the Atari 5200 podcast. Let us know how you like the games, what you like, what you don't like. Give us your input, give us your feedback, and we'll make sure to read it on the next show.
And if you need our email address, it's very simple, nothing complicated. It's the Atari 5200 podcast, the Atari 5200 podcast at gmail.com.
I guess that's a wrap.
I think that's a wrap.
All right, good night.
Until next time, David.
All right, good night, folks.
Good night, everyone. The Atari 5200 podcast was recorded before a live studio audience.
The views and opinions expressed on the preceding program are those of the hosts and persons appearing on the program, and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of ColecoVision or Intellivision owners. The Atari 5200 podcast is not responsible if you should start liking the Atari 5200 console over its competition. At this time, the Atari 5200 podcast now concludes its podcast day and ceases recording. The Atari 5200 podcast is produced under the authority of Bob Benedetti and David Vucetic. Regular listening of this episode now continues on iTunes and other quality feeds.
Discover Atari. And discover how far you can go.